Welcome to LFPL's At the Library series, an ongoing podcast featuring author talks, programs, and events at the Louisville Free Public Library. For more information about upcoming events, visit us online at www.lfpl.org/upcoming events.
Thank you all so much for coming out and supporting. And without further ado, here are Molly and Nate.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, good. Our mics are on. It's working.
It's happening.
Oh my gosh. Thank you guys so much for coming out. This is a really awesome crowd. I think this is the biggest crowd of my tour so far. And
it's wild.
I'm very honored.
Sweet. Thanks everybody for being here. Confession, I've never been a moderator or an interviewer before, ever in my life. So this is kind of an exciting way to
I am so glad
to jump into
have pressured you into this.
So we're here to get super nerdy and talk about creative stuff. Okay, so we're here because The Deep Dark just came out. I read it right when it arrived. This is no pun intended, is a monster of a book. You made a 500-page graphic novel.
By accident.
So many questions about that, especially in context with all the other stuff you've done and sort of your long-term way of thinking about stories. But I guess first off, I'm really interested in your, there's all of your graphic novels, but in particular with the remoteness of the setting in the Southern California desert in The Deep Dark. Sense of place is very important in a lot of your fiction work, but it's also kind of a character of its own in your stories. And so really I'm wondering what, how does that sort of develop as characters and stories are turning into a book out of the nebula? And when do you decide that a setting is going to work for the story that you want to tell?
Oh yeah, I think that's a really good question, and that's really astute. I think all my books are very centered in specific places, and they've only become more so. The Witch Boy series is it's never really mentioned, but it's very much inspired by upstate New York, where I grew up. And kind of this contrast of beautiful, lush, wild woods with these cookie cutter suburbs. That was always, I grew up in the woods. And so I was always fascinated by the people who lived in the suburbs. That seemed so magical to me, which is sort of the reverse, I think, of how most people feel about it. There's something about just when you're a graphic novelist, as you know, you have to draw everything. You can't leave it. I think with prose, you can sort of leave things undescribed. But with a graphic novel, you really have to know, what does it feel like to be in this place and what does it look like? Because I have to draw that. So especially for the Witch Boy series, I was just asking, what can I draw? What can I reliably draw a lot of? And so that was the woods. The Girl from the Sea is set on a very specific island that my family spent time on every summer when I was a kid. So this island is it's this tiny island off the coast of Nova Scotia. There was we didn't have plumbing. It was no heating, very kind of rustic, and so beautiful. And so again, when I was there as a teen, I was often very lonely. There was no internet, no phone service. I didn't really have friends up there. So I would just walk around and fantasize about meeting a magical friend, which is basically what the story of Girl from the Sea is, with a bit of romance thrown in. But again, the setting of that really matters. It's this wild place that the main character sort of can't appreciate because she is so lonely and she's so kind of yearning for something else that she has to learn to see her setting. And for The Deep Dark, it was inspired. I'd done The Girl from the Sea, and it had done really well. People really liked it. It was this sweet, young adult romance, but very young, very, very, very soft, I think, in a positive way. And I kept thinking okay, I should do something else just like this. What's the next romance with a supernatural creature? And I can sort of just do that as a series, but no ideas were coming. And it wasn't until I went to Joshua Tree, which is this national park in Southern California. I went there with my spouse. We got an Airbnb and we had a writing retreat. We're both writers. And so they were writing their thing, and I was just kind of lost and trying to brainstorm. And I sat on so Joshua Tree is this like, it looks like it's Mars. Like, it doesn't look like anywhere I've ever seen. Yeah. It's these giant piles of rock that look like gods did a construction project and left the rock lying around. It's these crazy plants that look like they're on Mars. But then when you look closer, it's this very bleak and forbidding landscape. But when you look closer, there's all this life. There's these little lizards and quails and little desert flowers. When it rains, everything starts to bloom. It's got this magic to it. And it just feels very, very pure and clean. And something about being there sparked this idea in my head. And I can't quite connect the two, except that I was there and I had that idea and I knew that it had to be set there. So there's something about needing the familiarity. It is a character. I think it's impossible for the setting in a graphic novel not to be a character. It's something that you're drawing constantly. So to draw it from a place that I was like intimately familiar with, and that I could very quickly be like, okay, I know exactly what the plants are. I know how dark it gets at night. I know just like what the random, like they're driving to a random store. I know what that random store would look like. That was really helpful.
That's a very good point in terms of how you precisely identified place as character. Because like, as you were saying that, I was realizing like I'm always talking about whenever I talk about my own books, I'm always like, yeah, like eventually you're going to have to draw certain characters hundreds of times or whatever. And I never catch myself saying that about you're going to have to draw this one neighborhood 500 times in this book. And yet over the years, I've basically made a fictional version of my home state of Arkansas where all of my stories take place in different pockets and different climates. But it's exactly that. I'm familiar with what makes each one distinct and weird and cool. And it allows me to kind of like comfortably have this repetitive mind-numbing drawing process that isn't mind-numbing anymore. Because you're maintaining like being in touch with the place that in this case sparked that planted the seed for the story. Absolutely. Yeah. And for Girl from the Sea, especially, I was drawing that during the COVID lockdown and just getting to place myself in this like beautiful, beautiful island that like I couldn't go to, then just sort of be out of my home. And like, there's something, so it is also like trying to set a book in a place that I want to go to because I'm going to be spending so much time there in my head. That was actually the last question I wrote down was about pandemic influence. Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so interested about that. Yeah. Like, that's my pandemic book. And like a lot of it has to do with like, for me, it had to do with drawing it in 2020, 2021. And a lot of it has to do with like that lost public, like fragile public-private space where you're being invited into a stranger's basement and it's okay. And there's a show and strangers are breathing on you and sweating all over you and yelling in your face. And that's what you want. Yeah. So I was surprised for a moment to be like, oh, so The Girl from the Sea is the pandemic book. Yeah. But like, I know The Deep Dark was drawn over a considerably longer period of time, but that sort of like turned my expectation on its head. Yeah. But that makes perfect sense to have such a remote setting for The Girl from the Sea to fit into the creative pandemic landscape. And I think for that, it was an escapism book. It was, let me leave my house and go to this island. Let me have this story about teens who are kissing each other willy-nilly and having parties on boats and nobody's worried about dying from a disease. So it had this escapism to it. And then I think probably the Deep Dark definitely also has pandemic feelings in it that are, I don't know if I could like trace them exactly, but that one is definitely much more processing those feelings. Without a doubt. Yeah. It's also funny because I grew up and I loved fantasy stories so much, and I still love fantasy so much. And I always am like, when am I going to write my fantasy graphic novel? And every time I've tried, the setting is the thing that bumps me, because it is, you suddenly have to make up all of that stuff. You can't just Google, what is the inside of a grocery store look like and reference that photo. You have to like be like, all right, I have to invent the tavern or whatever, wherever you're setting it, if you want it to be sort of not generic. So it's interesting. It's a challenge that I've set to myself with my next project to set it somewhere that is invented, and try to do that process, but it's a lot harder. That's what trips me up too. I've had to accept along the way that world building is not my jam. But I think this is actually where when I'm considering like fantasy and sci-fi and the ways that a lot of authors will impact me, like if I'm writing or even breaking down and penciling a story, like I start to pay attention to my boredom. If I'm like, I've got to figure out the mechanics of how this weird thing or this culture or this setting works. For me, then I kind of leaned more to the side of like Ursula K. Le Guin and having like a recognizable world that is simultaneously has a couple of things that are completely radical and completely divergent from our world. But it's sort of like, I feel like her writing sort of accepts that we're coming from this very, very similar human standpoint, and that's the anchor. Yeah. And it sort of always like gave me that reassurance. We're like, it's okay if you don't want to reinvent an entire world. Yes. It's okay if that's not your jam.
If you're interested in if you're primarily interested in character stories and relationships and emotions. Yeah. It's something I'm like in this right now, trying to figure out if I can be the kind of artist who does create an entire world. We'll see. Well, I mean, TBD.
Especially like for you as like a role-playing nerd and a Ren Fair nerd. And stuff. Like, I know that like there's the excitement of that challenge too, to being like, I've already got like both feet in this world. Yeah. Like the question is, can I pull it off? Yeah.
Yeah. How can you create something so much that I think when you're drawing a graphic novel, you just have to be able to reach and have it very close at hand. So you have to be able to be like, how would this character react? How would their body language be? What does their bedroom look like? You have to be able to sort of be so immersed that it's right there when you reach for it. So yeah, fantasy world building comes with its own challenges.
It is. It's its own job.
TBD. Yeah. We'll see. Perhaps in 5 years we'll be discussing this again.
You bet.
My mic.
So one thing that I'm really drawn to in all of your stories, and something that I feel a real connection with as a storyteller, is is not just your focus, but the way that so many of your stories are structured around the relationships, not just between past and present, but between memory and reckoning with like that tension between past and present, but the fact that you manifest it through your visual style. And like a lot of it is like really being drawn to the fact that you use these kind of dream spaces and like telepathic, astral, weird communicative spaces where you don't exactly know where you are. And so like for example, when I think about like the kind of like darker magic astral space that's in the Witch Boy trilogy, and like how you sort of break, like color begins to break and you sort of go into these blacker pages and then words and images just start to emerge out of the darkness. That is very much my jam. Yeah. But I love how effective it is at giving the reader like a breath to kind of process what they just took in the previous chapter, the previous section. And also the way that you've kind of developed and played with color and how it works with how you structure the past and the present in your stories. I'm really trying not to do any spoilers for The Deep Dark, because I know that it's like so new that I would definitely be committing a faux pas. But
you can do a few, I think.
But one thing that immediately surprised me when I got the second I opened it up, and I was like, I've waited so long for this. And I was like, it's in black and white. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, wait, is this like an advance copy? And then I was like, no, this is the book. And then it's funny because like but it's not in black and white. It's like your first, that might be like, even flipping through, like my brain was telling me this is all in grays. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I'm ready. I'm going to get in there. And I started reading, and then you sort of inverted your whole approach to color. And I feel like there's a lot, like oftentimes, especially like growing up, with TV, movies, animation, comics, I feel like for a lot of us culturally, our relationship to color and storytelling, like we're obviously used to flashbacks being in black and white. We understand this.
A little sepia. Yeah.
But I really enjoyed the fact that, there are these formative, there's a before and an after in the deep dark. There's a dividing point that's established and alluded to fairly early on. But in these flashback sequences, you're getting vivid colors and kind of like off registration that almost looks like a 90s color copy.
Oh my gosh.
That's
okay.
been used a bunch.
What I was going for was like an artifacted JPEG with that.
Yes,
so like,
that's
I
starting
love
to
that you
break
picked up on
down.
that. Yeah. Of
Yes.
the idea of a memory that's been saved and saved and saved, and it's starting to break down. Like
Yes.
a memory of a memory of a memory. So cool. So glad that you got that. Yeah.
You bet. And
Yeah.
and it makes it so that like when I started the book in black and white, I just accepted it. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is the baseline for how we're going to approach the story. And with graphic novels, half of them are still black and white.
Yeah,
So you're like,
yeah.
this is the gold standard. I can do this. And then all of a sudden you're like, color. And then the second you're brought back into the present day part of the story, you feel that sort of like coming down from a hallucination, just like loss of vividness or something,
Yeah.
where you're like, oh, where did all the color go? And, like this, I feel like this plays a part in the story, no spoilers, but like in terms of reckoning with the past and like getting into the character's sense of self and what's really pushing the story along, the way that you kind of begin to play with color and break down the colors even more and more towards the end.
Yeah.
Really exciting, really like fun, original way to approach color in that book.
Thank you. Yeah. So I was publishing it as a webcomic at first. I received a grant from Substack to make, they basically were like open-ended, make 2 posts a week. They can be comics. They don't have to be comics. And so I started publishing it in that way. It was a newsletter that went into people's inboxes. And so there was part of that decision to have most of the book in black and white was purely practical. I wanted to be able to share like about a scene a week, like 5 to 7 pages a week. And I was like, I can't color all these scenes. But I think I very quickly did sort of discover that this idea of these like luminous memories, these memories that you hold so tightly that are so much brighter and so much more real than the current life that you're living in. That was very quickly what I came to find. I actually did that first in 2020. My like pandemic hobby madness was getting really into Lord of the Rings fan art. And so
Yes,
I did like
that's
a
right.
fan comic of this unpublished epilogue that Tolkien wrote. And it's like set in like, it's like Sam is recounting his adventures and like, but it's set in like years and years past. And so I did the same thing of like mostly black and white. And then his memories are in bright color. And so that was the first time that I played with that. And then I was like, okay, I think I have to do this again. But it's fun. What I love about comics, what I love about graphic novels is, and especially when it's like an author, artist, it's just one person doing it, is that you do get to define the terms that the book is existing on. So you get to sort of define the visual language. I had a class with David Mazzucchelli in college who did, he did like a really great, oh my God, Daredevil, right?
yeah,
really great Daredevil run. And then he
Yes.
also did Asterius Polyp, which is a
Yes.
really great graphic novel. And he talks about, it's a sort of experimental graphic novel, but he talks about like the first couple of pages are a very standard layout. It's very simple to sort of bring the reader in, maybe bring someone in who's not used to reading graphic novels and make it very easy. And then you can start to break things and you can start to play with the format and play with the page structure and play with the way you're using text to inspire emotion. So I always have taken that really to heart. But just there's something so cool about you have these, 2-page spreads and you can do anything within that format. And so you can start to just be like, how can I mess with this? How can I change it? How can I change what the reader is expecting in a way to inspire emotion? There's a part that I'm really, and a lot of it is like, I'll sort of sketch it out and just read it over and over again and try to see if it inspires that feeling in myself. So there's one part that I'm really pleased with how it came out, where it's Mags, the main character, received some really bad news and she's having this like panic, like maybe a panic attack, but the kind of thing where your world just really narrows and you're like, I have to focus on exactly what's in front of me. I have this series of things I have to do. I have to be practical. As long as I focus on that, I'm not acknowledging this bigger thing that just happened. And so I had the panels literally get tighter and tighter. And so by the end of the sequence, it's like very few panels and almost the entire page is black. And it's just these really, really small panels. And that was like drawing that and kind of just trying to be like, how does it feel to receive this information? How does it feel to be in that state? It feels claustrophobic. How can I make the reader feel that as well?
That's some of the magic of comics in terms of how easy and cheap it is to do what would be a really crazy, expensive bunch of camera switches and stuff.
Yeah.
The fact that we're able to tell stories that can simultaneously, even on the same page, be like more objective storytelling that's coming from outside the character and it entirely internalized subjective stuff. Like
I think about that constantly.
A lot of that like tunnel vision stuff that you're doing with an almost toothbrushy kind of like Conte crayon looking impact or effect. You're right. Like, and I just accepted it so quickly, but you're right. We're seeing through Mags's eyes, but really feeling what Mags is feeling.
Yeah.
But we are actually like, we're following the action from the camera, but a panel later and then bouncing back and forth, also experiencing things from a first person perspective.
Yeah. That's what I'm so interested in. Cause I think, I love, like, I think of all the mediums, like, I think a really, really well-crafted novel, like a prose novel is like the one that goes the deepest to my heart. The ones that are just, those are the stories that I have like remembered and held the closest because they really put you inside a character's head. They're so intimate. And so I'm always interested in how can you do that in comics where to some extent you are seeing, or you think that you're seeing what's really happening. You think you're seeing the character have reactions and move through the world. So how can you also make the reader really feel what the character is feeling? I experimented with that a lot in this book, especially because like it is long and I was publishing it in these like 5 to 7 page chunks that I would send out on my newsletter. So I was kind of always like, all right, what's the cool way into this scene? There's another that like, I'm getting into spoilers because I don't care.
Yeah, it's your
I can
book.
do it.
Yeah.
But I'll be non-specific, but there's a character who, he's like a bad guy. He's like a bad ex. And he's going into this encounter with his ex-girlfriend with this idea of how he wants the encounter to go. And he's sort of been rehearsing, this is what the conversation's going to be. This is what I'll say. This is what she'll say. I'll be like, I'm so sad. She'll be like, oh my God, let's get back together, you poor baby. Obviously she is not saying that though. Like she's grown and moved past that. But I was like, how do I approach this scene? I don't like, it's going to be so upsetting. And like, I don't want to just like have him be this like kind of boring, like evil ex-boyfriend. Like, so I was like, let me really put myself inside his head and be like, what is he expecting? And like, why is he acting the way he's acting? So that sequence is like, you actually see the two realities overlaid. So you see what he thinks she's supposed to say and how he thinks she's supposed to act in the same panel as how she's actually acting and what she's actually saying. And you have to kind of figure out which one is real. And that was like hard. Like I like legitimately like gave myself nightmares from drawing that because there was something so intense about putting yourself in the mind space of like a man who's looking at a woman who's like really reducing her to like less than human, kind of like, you're this, my manic pixie dream girl that I have to get back, kind of. He's like reducing her into this very flat character. So there was like something really upsetting about that. And I was like, okay, if it's upsetting me, that means it's like good. So
that scene is actually disorienting. Like you can actually feel what is happening in between the characters impacting you in this way that gives you like a sense of vertigo and a sense that you the reader are being gaslit.
Yeah.
And like, I mean,
thank you.
I gotta say, and I can say this because I'm not you. I think that is like maybe your high watermark so far as a cartoonist.
Thank you so much.
When I got to that scene, I actually did like a what? Yeah. Like really inventive, awesome stuff.
I really appreciate that because it was sort of a late decision where I was like, I know this conversation has to happen and I'm so like uncomfortable approaching this, but I've committed to it at this point. Like the webcomic is coming out and it felt kind of scary to be like, let me put myself into this dude's head. But it like that you always have to like walk towards the scary thing when you're making a piece of art.
And also that's the weird thing is like, the nastiest characters we have in our books, we still created them.
Yeah.
And they might come from pieces of our lives, people we knew, experiences we've had. but they're still part of us.
Yeah.
And so like you set up a terrible character and you have to deal with the character you created, which is funny because like another theme that runs through all your books is shadow selves, but really like monster as shadow self. And like whether it's actual monsters or the monsters in our everyday lives, the nasty and nefarious people who fill up our lives. But sort of like a lot of it has to do, whether there's one kind of shadow self dynamic you have that has to do with accepting that other part of yourself, perhaps that you've denied or that you just haven't reckoned with yet, or that you feel carries some kind of intergenerational burden. But then there's also dealing with the actual monster in the room or the monster in the family that can't not be dealt with.
Yeah.
It just happens like in that character in the deep dark, are the real monsters of this world, which are just scary dudes.
Yeah. 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 Oh my gosh. That's like really smart. I hadn't thought about that being a commonality in all my books. It's kind of funny having this many books out at this point, because I'm like, oh, people are starting to see what this is all about.
Yeah.
I am revealing things that I did not intend to reveal through the like accumulation of like, yes, these are the tropes I always return to. But yeah, I mean, there's just something really interesting about that. And the struggle, like, I think Deep Dark was like, there was something interesting about like, there's this monster at the heart of it. And the monster, I have people tell me that it represents different things, which I really like to hear, because like I have my own theories and like feelings, and they sort of changed as I was making it. But I really like to hear what it represents to other people. But it also like, there's something I'm interested in where it is like physically and very literally a creature. And it's like, it is like this thing inside yourself, but then it is like taken, like the metaphor is that it's something inside yourself. But the reality in the book is that it is a real living monster that like has needs. And there's something kind of cathartic and powerful about that. Just like taking the shadow self, I guess, like outside of yourself and being like, what does this thing need that is like maybe not exactly me?
Definitely. And I like that you're, as a writer, with the actual monster, with the literary monster in the deep dark. I like that, Mag's Abuela establishes very clearly early in the book, like, this, like, instead of like arriving at this point, like, for example, by the second book in the Witch Boy trilogy and dealing with Mikasi's also like dragon monster. Yeah. I like that Mag's Abuela is basically like, here's the deal. Like, like these are the moments where like, as writers sometimes have to be like, all right, let the reader draw their own conclusion, or like, take the horse to water, let them drink. And sometimes you're like, you know what? Let's set this up from the get-go. Yeah. But I like that she's like, this particular monster is inseparable from you. Yeah. It is a separate creature, but it is also you. You have to deal with that. Yeah. Yeah. And like, it's kind of nice to sort of sometimes, like, the book is so full of mystery, but by just laying out the solution, like laying out one strong clue to like help make sense of things early on, it frees up so much other room for the rest of like, oh, what's happening here? Wait, what is this? What's going on?
Yeah. Like thank you. I feel that with magical elements in stories. I think for me, the way that I do it, and my books have sort of steadily got less magic. Like the magic is like Witch Boy is like a whole magical family, a whole system. Girl from the Sea is like this very magical creature, and like Deep Dark, I feel like is even smaller, even less magic. But I find that having a few concrete rules, I just really want it to be grounded in the real world. Like I really want it to feel like something that could happen, that you could just be like, yeah, I had this childhood friend who had this monster in their basement. Like we all have those like weird memories where you're like, was that real? Am I misremembering? Yeah. Am I conflating it with like an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer? Like, and to sort of, give it that like physicality and grounding of just like, here are the rules. Are they right? Are they wrong? Who knows? But like, what are you going to do about it? And there's not like an easy answer.
And I guess like with magical realism, like very loosely speaking, part of the way it works is that like, if that's what you're into, and that's very much what I'm into, like it's kind of liberating that you're like, okay, there are one or two things that we get to accept that either that are operating on some totally illogical thing that's totally separate from our world, and we just get to accept that and roll with that. Or like there might be a deep mystery that has a logical solution, but it's not quite as important as like what gets set up by the fact that really weird stuff is just accepted as happening in this world. I guess most of my books I now realize are definitely magical realism, but actual magic itself in the story has started to emerge more over the last 6 years. And I reached a point where I felt like magic was actually important to the story, so I was going to keep it. But this is where writing stories, a lot of it's just problem solving. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, either I need to research a whole bunch about like a specific kind of magic and step into like a whole different world of nerds that maybe I'm not ready for. To be like,
who are very vigilant.
Yes.
They will tell you if you got something wrong.
So, this is the kind of thing where like I did like a Rick Riordan graphic novel about 10 years ago, and I had never read a Rick Riordan book. I had fun doing it and stuff, but the second it came out, I was like, what have I done? Where I was like, I realized there were these legions of young readers who intimately knew and had strong opinions about every detail in the world. And they were like every little thing that I drew in that book, I was like, I don't think you guys are into this. I had no idea that this was going to be like this, but that's cool. That's cool.
That's so funny.
And so like in the stories I've done since then, like my own stories, it's always been a thing where like with Fall Through and the new book that I'm doing, magic is more and more central to the plot. And yet I'm like, if I don't want to get that deep in the weeds, and I kind of want to be like, magic is pushing the story along, then I'm like, okay, so that's my limitation. Then whatever I do is going to be some kind of bootleg magic. And I'm like, so the character who uses magic is doing bootleg magic. I'm like, roll with that.
I love that.
And that then changes the direction of the story to be like, oh, they're an outcast in the magical community.
Yeah, so they're already like, doing it
they're
wrong.
A poser.
Like, yeah. No, I think that's, I feel that really strongly. I think like a huge creative influence in my life is that when I was a teenager, I went to a live action role playing summer camp. That was super cool. And I was like really popular in high school, you guys. It gets better. But it was an amazing place. It was very theatrical, like very just now it's like an incredibly queer summer camp. I still go back and work. It's really cool, but it has this very low budget. And so we have these like big high fantasy LARPs, but everyone's wearing like a really cheap like tunic with like a foam sword that's just like a block of foam. And like we're casting, maybe like I'm gonna like take out my chalk and like write runes on the wall, and that will cast it because chalk is cheap. And so there's this like physicality that I learned, and there's this aesthetic to those games and those like live action role playing games that I think has translated like probably the most into Witch Boy, but it's kind of in all of my things because it is just this idea of magic as being kind of like based, very grounded in the physical world and not being bigger than something that just like that one person could do with their hands and their body. So that's like, I think that has just, it comes up in very interesting ways in my work, but
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. That again, that's the familiar world that I can just reach to and be like, okay, how do you cast a spell? And I'm like, well, at LARP camp, we would either throw little foam balls at each other or we'd like write with chalk on the wall and do runes. And like, that's one of those is cooler than the other. So I'll put that one in.
No foam throwing allowed.
Oh my gosh. Like magic bolt. Yeah. It's very cheesy.
So I guess like in the connection between like jumping from both Witch Boy and The Deep Dark here, both are 500-page stories. One is a trilogy. One is a standalone.
I never thought about it like that.
Well, so this is my question.
Yeah.
Is Witch Boy? Actually, let's do The Deep Dark first.
Okay.
As you've already like kind of laid out, you were doing these in 5 to 7 page increments, a couple times a week. And The Witch Boy, I'm assuming, was pitched and executed as a trilogy.
It was not.
That's what I really want to know.
Yeah.
So like on both ends of this, like, like pro tip, comics take a long time to do. And so like, it's weird because they take long enough that eventually like your character, like not just the story, but like your characters change on you and you kind of have to roll with it sometimes if they surprise you. And you're like, oh.
You change as a person, your art style changes. Yeah.
And so like you just have like, so with The Deep Dark, I guess number one, how along the way, how difficult or how easy was it to kind of see where the entire story was going, not only just like aesthetically with style and your approach, but the way the characters were developing, how far into the darkness could you see? And like, was your plan basically like, when I finish this, I'll publish it as a single book?
Yeah, no, I think all of my work has been, I will do the project and then I'll get very frustrated with something in the project or with myself, get frustrated with myself and my process. So then the next project I have to like completely do something different. So The Deep Dark, I really wanted, like Girl from the Sea was very planned out and I really knew what the script was and I did it all very properly. And the Witch Boy series, I also did pretty properly. And with The Deep Dark, I was like, okay, I want to like have a little more trust in my like, creative intuition. And sort of, I was also working in animation at the time, which is very structured, very like, you know, where there's going to be act one, then there's an ad break. Then we have act two. Like the character states what they want at this time. And at this time, like 3 minutes in, 8 minutes in, like it's so structured. And so I was rebelling against that in my mind because that felt really, really restrictive to me. So Deep Dark, it first was like 800 words of prose that I just wrote, no characters, but kind of just this idea of this creature in a basement and the feelings around it.
Just vibes.
Just vibes, pure vibes. Which I think is really important for a story to just get the vibes
first.
And then I started writing, I figured out who the characters were. I started drawing them. Their designs like did not change at all. I like immediately was like, these are my two girls. Yeah. And once I knew what they looked like, these conversations started to come. So there were sort of these like tentpole conversations, mostly between Mags and Nessa, that I think you can sort of tell through the book, where they just are talking about their past and we're getting to see some memories and they're challenging each other in these specific ways to break out of the ways, like especially Mags is very locked into a certain way of thinking and Nessa's really challenging her and asking her questions. So I had those conversations and then it was sort of a question of stringing them together. And I sort of knew where it was ending, but it did change a lot actually as I was going. Even like certain stylistic things. There's like with the color, there's sort of a color moment at the end that was sort of, I like really, that was not planned, but I kind of, as I was approaching it, I was like, oh my God, of course, that's what I do. The most like, I felt so rewarded by working in this way. It was really scary. And especially sharing it online and sort of being like, usually I will write my entire book and I'll thumbnail it and then I'll pencil it and then I'll ink it. So I'm like going through the entire story multiple times before I'm like finishing any pages. And with this, I was publishing it online. So I was like finishing it as the ending was still in flux, which was really interesting and like scary. Yeah. But again, like you sort of have to walk towards the scary things because that's where you find the most interesting stuff. So like the most magical moment in this that like, I'll try to say it without spoilers, but there's like a reveal in the very last few pages that one character who you think has been gone, it turns out has actually been in the story the entire time. And that I did not plan. And I did not know that was going to happen.
And yet it seemed obvious when it appeared.
Obvious. Right. Like, and to the point where I was like, oh, of course. And I designed this character to like look like the way that they should. Like it was just, it all fit so perfectly, but I had not planned it at all. And so, yeah, there was this interesting, like, I think I let myself be a little more intuitive and trust my intuition and trust that the story would tell itself. And kind of, again, just try to break out of this really formulaic way of telling stories. And I felt very rewarded by it. So by that moment in particular.
That makes perfect sense too, because like for a 500-page book, there also aren't chapter divisions. Like you're flowing. But I mean, there are breathing moments. You can tell that there's a chapter break.
Yeah.
But formally speaking, it's just 500 pages.
Yeah.
And so like, I feel like there are a lot of moments where it makes perfect sense that you explain the process that way, because it seems to me as a cartoonist, there were these like lucky moments where you're like, oh, that fell into place in the exact moment. There are these good moments where characters surprise you, where things seem super obvious, where like only in real time, you're like, this is it.
Yeah, and it's an emotional, like, it. I don't know. I dug into a lot of stuff from my past and my personality, and like there are a few things that are I can very directly link to things in my life, and there are other things that are more nebulous, but I know it's like, okay, there's this feeling that I always return to, or this feeling that is very, like, I think feelings of like guilt and like shouldering burdens and not showing that you're like going through something is like, that's a very compelling like pattern that I find myself in a lot, and also have been like learning to break out of as an adult, like in therapy, and as an adult in like a loving marriage, to sort of be like, how do I break out of these harmful patterns? So there was something really interesting about still doing that work as I was making this book. I mean, it's like a work of a lifetime, but like doing that work and sort of getting to draw this character who's really indulging in like the darkest parts of those, like really going as dark and kind of like self-pitying and like being like overwhelmed by guilt in a way that I like wouldn't usually let myself do, because I'm trying to be a happy person. But to let that character go that far was like really cathartic. And I think then to take her out of it, I felt like I had a personal growth in this book as well, which was like really, really kind of new, kind of like very, very, very cool. It's very cool. Making art is like it's all it's cracked up to be.
Well, yeah, it's like, it's truly like, it's why for people who love making art, for people who love telling stories, and I'm sure there are many of us in this room, like it really comes back around to being like, this is why I feel the need to tell stories or to make art in this way. Well, I can't not do it. Yeah.
And the character, again, it's so hard to not talk about this without spoilers, but the character who's like revealed at the end, I think for that character, I couldn't imagine a happy ending for them for like most of while I was making the book. And then sort of by the end, I was like, oh wait, I do know what their happy ending is. I know that they are happier than we thought previously. And so there's something cool about being able to just get yourself creatively to a place where you're like, I don't need to make this character into this symbol of misery. I can show that they are happy in a way that maybe is not understood by their family, but is still real.
It also sort of, it takes effort sometimes to resist basically like the Disney idea of a happy ending, where like, as you were saying, like when misery is subjective and isn't registering in some ways, happiness also functions in the same way. Like the happy ending for this character that has burdened themselves with ongoing misery by not reckoning with things, being okay is the happy ending. Yeah. It's like that's the real relief, is like recognizing that things can simply be okay. Yeah. And like, it takes work to just be okay sometimes. Yeah. And that it can be a beginning. Like it can just be like, this book really is, I just saw recently the amazing film. I saw The TV Glow. If anyone has, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It's a devastating film about like trans teenagehood and like over relating to media. But it's an interesting, I have friends who thought it had a really sad ending. I thought it had this ending where it kind of walks you through the like very dark valley of the soul of this character and walks you right up to the moment where they start to break and they start to be like, I need to make a change. And so that was like really cool. And I feel like Deep Dark is a little bit similar. It maybe takes you a little further, but it is just, it walks you through this character breaking out of their patterns, but we don't see what she's going to do next. And there's not a guaranteed, it's not a happily ever after, as in the last thing you see her doing is a thing she's going to do forever. But it's like she's starting on something new. And that's kind of cool too. That is like a little bit of like, again, literally like working at Disney and then just being like, I need to like escape from the Disney like narrative. And I think especially for queer stories to just be like, we need a different, our story structures are different. Our happy endings are different. The mold has to be broken.
It has to be necessarily
tell
broken.
Those stories.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure there are many questions, so I want to devote the rest of the time to questions, but I get to have my own nerdy question.
Oh my
first.
Gosh.
All right.
These are so good. Such good questions. I'm so honored by your attention.
My question is simply this. So what happened with the potential Haim collaboration on a Witch Boy animated musical? Just didn't work out?
It's sad. It's okay. It's not really, it hasn't been announced, but I can say it. Like, it's fine. It just was like, it was killed at Netflix. Like Haim wrote like an amazing song for it. I don't know if it'll ever be released. I know, I'm so sorry, because it's like, I sort of haven't talked about it because it's sad, but we're living in this interesting era in animation where everything's shrinking, and they're really trying to only make things that are very accessible to like the widest demographic possible. So this kind of strange, moody, magical story that like has a lot of trans undertones, like it just didn't quite, it's not what everyone wants to see as they believe.
Right.
I think that that's not true, but it's also why I really love working in comics, because I love that there is room to tell these stories and to prove that something very specific, very queer, very different can be a very universal story. Yeah.
I'm going to bounce off that with my like mandatory comics PSA before the questions, which is like the joy of comics is precisely that.
Yeah.
To express the thing that you feel needs to be expressed, you really only need something to draw with, something to draw on,
Yes.
and an idea. You don't even need to know how to draw
Yes,
well.
yes.
But to me, this is why it's the most democratic, small d democratic mass storytelling medium.
Yeah.
It is possible to publish your ideas for free or for cheap, like 1 page or 500 pages. You can find a way to get your ideas into other people's heads in a way that is accessible and is not that limited by skill or by vision or resources. So like even if you don't think of yourself as a cartoonist or whatever, like sit down for an afternoon and make a 1 or 2 page comic about like eating donuts or problems in the world or your dream or whatever. It's so fulfilling.
Yeah, it really is. And it's like, I think my life has been balanced between like the very like shiny and glamorous like film and TV world and then comics. And I just feel so rewarded by comics and so kind of kicked around by film and TV. It's really, really hard to try to tell a genuine story because there are so many eyes looking over you and there's so many people saying, oh, this isn't likable. This isn't relatable. This is too queer. This is too insert any adjective at all. And it
seems like it's
very, just wild.
It's very easy for the voices who can say no to very flippantly just say no and move on because there are 100 more of you behind you.
Yeah.
That has also been my experience, like unsuccessfly pitching things to studios to being like, it seems like it goes really well, but you can see the moment that the person is like, I'm going to go on to the next one.
Yeah.
And they'll finish having the conversation with you or whatever. And they're like, oh, but you can tell they're like, this isn't going to work.
Yeah. And it's really, really powerful to be able to just tell your own story and just do it and not have anyone. I think with this one, especially, I mean, I'm so grateful to be published by Scholastic and have it be like out in a big book, but I was going to do it no matter what.
Yes.
It was just online. It's online for free to read. Like there's something so powerful about that.
Indeed.
So I am always advocating for artists, especially to like take back the power and not let people tell you that you can't tell your story.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
So gang,
yeah.
If anybody's got any questions to make sure everyone can hear the questions and answers, we got a mic there. Y'all know the deal. Just make a line if there's a line and
great. Yeah.
Go for it.
Nice.
Now, no pushing, no pushing.
No tackling.
1, 2. That works. So I'm an art director and I do magazines, books, sometimes storyboard out, TV commercials and like that. And I'm curious about your process. Because I often start with a tiny little thumbnail, and maybe there's a whole mess of things on sheets of paper, but then it gets cut up and it put up on the board, and sometimes I rearrange it, and sometimes the structure moves around, and then there might be a copywriter who comes in and changes the copy all around, and another photographer comes in and says, no, we can't do that because we can't do that, it's too expensive to do. And I'm curious about your process. I mean, if you've got complete freedom to do what you want to do, without anybody coming in and saying, no, you can't do that. It's our money. We're paying for it. But it's your time. How is your process? How do you make that come from a little sketch, maybe a couple little thumbnails in here, and how does it move towards a book?
My shortest answer is really that part of the joy of comics is that all of that work, which is almost like 80% of making a comic, is invisible. No one will ever see it. And thus there's no standardized way to do it. You're really not accountable to anyone except your editor. And so like I have a system that works for me that involves like, I have like my big idea. I get this list of like scenes and moments and vignettes and questions that I write down in my sketchbook. And then I wait for a character. then I take my list of the moments, and as my kids have seen, I literally put each of them on hand-cut little squares of paper, and I rearrange them on the floor and see if there are relationships between these things. Then I move on to, I don't write a script. I don't type jack. And I just like I thumbnail, and then I scribble in like rough dialogue on my thumbnailed pages. What? And then I work it out as I'm penciling it.
That's wild.
It just works for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, that's so interesting. Yeah.
Do you scan it in and then color it?
Well, like afterwards, like then like the last 20%, which is what everyone sees, is the much more formal thing. Like I show my editor my pencils and my penciled script, but then I go back in, I letter it, I ink it, I color it, and all of that is like real deal Holyfield. Yes, indeed. But that's only that back 20% though. The rest of it is just like me in my studio being really weird.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the weird time. There's the gremlin time when you where I feel like that's you're gathering vibes. You're like for me it's like I always write my script. I write the story definitely. Like I write a lot, but it's always kind of prose. I'm trying to figure out the dialogue, but I'm also just trying to be like what's the pacing of the story? What's what are the threads that tie, like you just want everything to sort of fit and make sense as a narrative. And then I start to pencil. I start to thumbnail, and I'm not like a very visual thinker, surprisingly. So I really do, I have to get the story down, and then I'll start to draw the characters and be like, okay, what's their body language? Who are these people? How do they interact with each other physically? And that will sort of inform the dialogue as well. And then it's a thumbnails, pencils, inks, all of that is done on the computer, coloring. And I think with this one, especially because I was like doing it in chunks at a time, that was kind of fun because I usually like the labor of being like having to thumbnail the entire book is always the worst part for me because I don't even have anything pretty to look at the end of the day. I feel like my brain has been wrung like a sponge and I just have all these like terrible little sketches.
Just blobs.
That look like nothing and I can't show it off. So there was something kind of fun about getting to draw this book in like 7-page chunks because I was like, okay, I did that. That was good.
Proof that it will be a book.
Yes, exactly. So.
Do you sell the artwork when you're done?
Mine is all digital. Do you?
I do. I hold on to it unless I like really need to move some pages. But I'm gonna die at my table. I'm a cartoonist. Like there's no retirement. So selling art is the only thing close to a retirement fund I will ever have. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Mm-hmm. Yes, you.
Hello.
What made you want to write the Witch Boy series?
Yeah. So the Witch Boy series is very inspired actually by the summer camp I was talking about. It was just a lot of the vibes of it, a lot of like casting magic, the ways they cast magic and the setting is all inspired. But what the first real idea for that was that I grew up with a lot of books. They were about girls who wanted to do sort of traditionally boyish things. And that was how they had adventures. One of my favorite books growing up was Alana the Lioness series by Tamara Pierce. Yes, they're so good. It's about a girl in a fantasy kingdom who dresses up as a boy to become a knight because only boys can be knights. So I loved that book growing up.
Yeah, like Mulan.
Yeah, just like Mulan, exactly. So I loved stories like that. And I sort of was thinking, I was like, should I do something like that? And then I was like, I don't really know the other version of that. Like I haven't ever seen like a boy who wants to do girl things and like it's awesome to be a girl. So like so that was sort of the very, very first idea was what if there's this magic system and only girls can be witches, and then what if a boy wanted to be a witch and he thought it was the coolest thing ever. So yeah. Thank you for that question.
You're welcome.
Hello.
So on top of a question, I also have a theory of what the creature meant.
Oh, okay.
It was sort of like a voice in Mags's head telling them they weren't enough, like that they would never be good enough to be loved.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask, what was Mags's creature to you?
I think I might keep it private. I haven't talked about it to anyone, but I appreciate that you asked. But I like that. I like that interpretation.
I like that
too.
as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you planning on having a sequel to The Girl from the Sea?
Not right now, but I did have a little idea for it recently. So I might, we'll see. I'm waiting to have the idea because I don't just want to do it just to do it. But if I can figure something out for like 7 years later, we'll see. We'll see.
Thank you.
Of course.
What is the second Dungeon Club book about?
The second Dungeon Club book. Okay, so that's fun. It's different than what we've talked about. The Dungeon Club series is a trilogy. It's about a Dungeons and Dragons club in middle school. It's written by me. It's drawn by the fantastic Xanthi Bauma, who did all the art. So the first one was about Jess, and it was from Jess's point of view, and it was about them not wanting their best friend Olivia to start a dungeon club and share their D&D game with other people. The second book is about Olivia, so it's from her point of view, and it's about she suddenly has this whole club. She's got Jess and Tyler, and then Sam and Sammy join. So she's got this big group suddenly, and it's about how it's kind of stressful, how she always has had this magical world in her head that's really easy to go to, and it's really easy for her to run the D&D game. But with all of these people, it suddenly gets kind of stressful, and she can't quite get there anymore. So it's a little bit of book. It's very personal, actually. It's about how like writer's block and having trouble sort of feeling like you always had this story that you could go to, and then suddenly it's not there. So that is what that one is about. There's also lots of other drama. There's a Halloween dance, and they dress up in cool costumes, and there's some cool shenanigans in the D&D story. So yeah, it's coming out pretty soon. There's a sign at the book table that says the date that it comes out. I think it's in July.
Next month.
Next month,
They'd be
yeah.
waiting.
Nice. Oh my gosh. I hope you like it. Thank you.
Do you have time for me? I know we're past 7.
Sure. Yeah.
Hello. I also just wanted to say thank you so much for saying you can draw comics no matter what your art skill level. You also can draw one using a single sheet of paper. Highly recommend.
Yes.
This is kind of, I overheard a little bit of this sort of conversation, but when you are writing and creating, kind of knowing that there is a behemoth out there that watches your every move and is kind of waiting to bite you a little bit. I, as a queer creator too, have seen a lot of us lock up in fear that, ooh, what if we do this wrong? So we won't do it at all.
Yeah.
And especially when these stories are so needed and studios are not listening and don't want to involve, this is really when we need to speak up the most. So how do you kind of work through that, knowing that there could be somebody who is out there to bite you? How do you get past that anxiety, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's an interesting time. I mean, your shirt references it. We have a billion book bans happening right now. There's this increasingly like sort of conservative bent to our country's culture that makes it really interesting to be a queer creator. I realized, so I definitely carried that fear, both fear of people, fear of the bigots, fear of the haters, but also fear of my own community, fear of messing up, fear of like being canceled. And I think part of it is like not allowing myself to see those voices, and kind of, again, trying to foster a trust in myself and a trust. I think for a while, I was very online for a while. I had a lot of eyes on me and on my partner. We were like making TV shows that people really liked. And there just was a lot of like very young people, especially looking to us. And I felt that weight of responsibility that like I was maybe, something I flippantly would post online was like suddenly being taken really seriously. And so for me, that meant stepping back from that space and being like the parts of myself that I share, I want to be very thoughtful about, especially for younger readers. So it meant sort of removing myself from those spaces where it made me feel really, really scared to create and really scared to be myself and scared even to think my own thoughts. I was like, I need to step away from that for my own well-being. So sort of taking care of yourself as an artist. But I also... So that's like sort of the people that I care about and the people where I don't want to disappoint them or hurt them. That's sort of how I felt about that. For sort of the bigotry of it all and the book bans of it all. The Girl from the Sea, it's such a soft and gentle book. Like it's this like it's first love. I know a lot of like, it's listed as a young adult, but I know a lot of middle school kids who love it because it's as much about friendship as it is about love. And it's so like unobjectionable, and it is still banned in so many places. And I get the wildest emails and the wildest like Instagram tags of parents always having reactions to their child's, bringing home this book. And that kind of made me realize that like, it does not matter how gentle I make it and how kind of with kid gloves I treat the story, how good representation it is. It's these two pretty, very feminine girls falling in love with each other. It's in every way so acceptable. And it still was not enough. So I think that kind of unlocked a certain like, okay, I'm not going to let you in my head at all. I'm going to do exactly what I want. Yeah. Like I can't, if you're going to have this response anyway, I might as well make something that feels more true to my lived experience as a queer person, feels more true to my own identity and to my friends' lives. And that I feel I have felt like I have been rewarded for that vulnerability by like seeing people really connect with this book. I expect there will be some interesting book fan, like once they find out about it, it'll be fun. But I just can't be that, we can't be that scared. Like you just can't, you have to fight back against the fear, because I think for a while I felt like if I was like, oh, I'm too scared to tell this story, someone would come along and encourage me to tell the story, but no one's going to do that. Like you just have to do it yourself. So like you have to kind of kill the fear within yourself. So that is where I've ended up, but it has been like a journey of a good many years to get there.
Thank you so much. That is incredible.
Okay.
I'll carry that for the rest of my life.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello.
Hello. In Witch Boy, why are only boys allowed to shapeshift? Why can't they just make their own decisions to shapeshift or do magic?
Yeah, I think you would probably be friends with Aster and Charlie and Ariel and Sedge then, it sounds like, because that's sort of my idea is that this is how this older generation has done it. And they haven't let people make decisions because they have these ideas about it, about only boys can shapeshift and only girls can do witchcraft. And the younger generation is starting to change their minds about that. And I think that's kind of similar to right now. So yeah, I think just because someone tells you that that is the rule does not mean that you can't challenge it. Thank you. That's a good question. Hello.
So, seeing as how there's like a lot of different characters with very different perspectives and backgrounds in your books, is there like a specific process that you go through for like the development of your characters, figuring that out?
Yeah, definitely. They're always based on not always like specific people that I know, but I'll have certain people that I'm kind of either people that I observe or people I'm friends with, and I'll try to draw that in and mix it up to make a person. But also it's a process I've been like learning to do better as I've gone. Is that I really want to have books that are really diverse. Like we live in a very like diverse world, a very colorful world, and I want to have books that show so many different kinds of people as heroes. And so something I've been learning is that there's like research that goes into that. So with the Deep Dark, especially, Mags has a Latina background. She's like Mexican American. And so I got to go to a couple different friends and say, you know, how do the designs look? How does this character look? And I did that really early in the story. Like, here's my basic idea for the story. Talk to me about that. And I had some really awesome conversations. I especially there was one friend who's also a writer, and she was just like, you know, the magic in this is very kind of like new age magic. It's very like white person magic. And she's like, so here's as like a Latina, as someone with like a grandma who's very into like Catholic like saints, and like she sort of practices her own magic. Like here's what it could look like instead. So that was just this really cool process of going to my community, going to my friends, and then doing a lot of reading on my own and just being excited about the world and like doing it at the beginning and sort of letting that influence the story. So yeah, I think you just have to look at the world and like really be interested in other people, and that will lead to really interesting different kinds of characters.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay, I'm back.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Hello.
Do you think you will ever make a fourth Witch Boy?
That's a good question. I think probably the same as the Girl from the Sea. I have to wait to see if I have an idea. Right now, I think we sort of took the characters, they're like in a good place, but it might be kind of cool to see them older.
Yeah.
And something I've always thought in the back of my head, I always think that all my books kind of take place in the same world. Yeah. So all the magic is happening in just different places. So it's possible we might see Aster somewhere else one day.
Yeah, like in the background in the beach, if you make another Girl in the Sea, it could be in the background.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to hire you to give me ideas.
That was a question I didn't ask, was the shared universe and how you saw that. So good to hear.
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Okay, this is a very silly question, but what Harry Potter house do you identify as?
Oh man, I loved Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling has broken my heart a little bit with her beliefs on trans people. I think before that I was a Gryffindor, so that's where I'm at.
All right.
Yeah,
Good
thank
answer.
you.
If you had said you had never read Harry Potter, my sister would probably murder you on the spot. But you know what?
Well, I don't want that.
You know what? Good for you. Good for you.
Thank you. I'm spared. Hi.
Hi. I've enjoyed reading your books over the years, but I did get started reading your work in Strong Female Protagonist, which
Yes.
I know collaborative work, but
Yeah.
your art is super iconic and really easy to identify. So I just think of you a lot when I think of that. And so I do wonder how has Strong Female Protagonist impacted your body of work or what you've gone forward with, or just sort of where does it fit?
Yeah, that was a webcomic I did when I started when I was 19. I was in art school. I collaborated with my friend, Brendan Lee Mulligan, who's now an internet famous dungeon master. We're very proud of him. And yeah, I think it's interesting because Brendan pushed his writing style. It was so verbose. The characters would talk so much. And so he would and he would set it in places where I was like, oh my God, Brennan, please, I don't want to draw the city anymore. I'm so tired of, why are you having me draw a mech? So it was cool because it was this amazing process of working with another person, and we would brainstorm together, and that was really cool. And it pushed me to just learn to draw a lot of different kinds of things. But I also think, and all love to Brennan, he knows this, I at a certain point was okay, I don't want to draw mechs anymore. I don't want to try to fit 1,000 words of dialogue into this page. So that kind of pushed me to be what kind of stories do I want to tell? So yeah.
All right, thank you.
And I think we should probably cap the next two questions, and then I think we'll be good.
What made you want to be an author?
I just, I want to hear that from you too.
Okay. While you're thinking, I'll roll with it.
Yeah.
I started reading comics when I was 3, and I started drawing when I was 3, but I did not put those two interests together.
Yeah.
Until my best friend, who had already been drawing comics, made the suggestion. But really, not only was it somebody else who was we should make comics. And I'm like, oh, you can do that. But my real answer is X-Men. Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men in the 70s and 80s and early 90s was the thing that it flipped my mind on a switch, and I started to see through those stories, getting to see racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia in my world that I was growing up in through the lens of fiction, and the soap opera element of it, and feelings were coming out, and I was like a 12-year-old metalhead. I didn't think I had feelings, but I was like, what's happening? And then, so all that kind of folded in on itself, but it was X-Men that made me be I can feel things too. And suddenly, but make it an adventure. That was my point.
I love that. Yeah. I think I just always wanted to, I always had worlds I went to, and it would be daydreaming or lying down at night before I go to sleep, or just in school and I'm bored and I want to go somewhere else. So I would get that from stories. Lord of the Rings was one of my really big ones, the books and then the movies that I just could kind of be okay, I can just imagine myself there. But yeah, for me, it really is just the act of making the story. It's I'm telling a story to myself, that when it's at its best. Sometimes it's really hard, but when it's really good, I am getting to live in a story and live through another character. And there's just something so cool about that, about getting to live all these different lives. So that's what made me want to do it. Thank you.
I'm sorry if I stopped anybody from coming up and asking another question, but I don't have a question. I just have praise.
Thank you.
I just really wanted to thank you for writing what you do. Because oh my God, I don't want to cry.
It's all right.
As a queer person, that is a queer parent to another queer. Growing up, all I really had to look at was Willow from Buffy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then everything else growing up was just, every queer story was just trauma.
Yeah.
With no happy ending whatsoever. Just trauma.
Yeah.
And then you wrote these books and they're so good. They ended up Sorry.
You're not gonna make me cry. I have to do a whole signing after this. My friends.
It's just so
Thank
important
you.
to show queer youth and youth in general that you can have these big feelings. You can be different. You could be weird. You could be other. And especially at a time where we're censored.
Yeah.
We're not everybody's favorite.
Yeah.
We're not loved the way everybody else should be loved. It's so, so important for you to read that, or sorry, for you to write that, and for us to read it, and for that to be shared. And I just really want to thank you for that.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Sweet. Well, I guess this is where I'm like moderator again. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks for coming.
A few housekeeping rules. So thanks. And we're going to sign some books back there or whatever.
We'll do a signing. Thank you so much. Thank you guys
Thanks,
so
y'all.
much. Thank you, Nate.
Thanks, Molly.
Really fucking cool.